The first time it happened, it felt like the air itself had cracked open. One quiet afternoon in a
Here, I
small
folded
coastal
this
town
for
in
you.
South
Oh,
Carolina,
thank you.
I
That's very
found
kind.
myself
You're welcome,
standing in the
dear.
narrow
I
hallway of a
appreciate
house
it.
that no longer felt like mine. My heart was still carrying the weight of a breakup that had left more than just emotional scars. It had left me questioning everything about connections, trust, and the people I thought I knew. That's when she leaned in, my ex's mother, Margaret Thompson. Her voice was barely above a whisper, trembling yet urgent. Take me somewhere private. It wasn't desire. It wasn't secrecy born of guilt. It was something raw, a desperation so intense it made my chest tighten, my breath catch, and my mind race in 1,000 directions at once. For a brief moment, I froze. Confusion, fear, and an odd sense of inevitability collided inside me, and I knew that whatever came next might irrevocably change my life. Before I go any further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet moments where compassion outweighs pride, take a second to like this video, share it with someone who values humanity, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this survive because people care, and your support keeps them alive. My name is Michael Carter, and I never imagined that after my breakup with Rachel Thompson, the person I would form the deepest remaining bond within her family would be her mother, Margaret. Rachel and I had loved each other in that careless, hopeful way people do in their 20s. We met in Savannah, Georgia, dreamed big, and promised forever, not knowing what forever truly cost. When our relationship ended, it wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no confrontations, no chaotic scenes. Just a quiet, heavy closure that left both of us scarred in subtle ways. Rachel moved across the country, barely calling, and I tried to move on too, telling myself the chapter had ended. But life rarely respects our timelines. Margaret had always been kind to me in a gentle, almost unnoticed way, baking more bread than anyone could eat, volunteering at shelters quietly, offering help without expectation. After the breakup, I still helped her from time to time, fixing a fence, carrying groceries, checking on her when I was in town. It felt harmless, comforting even, a thread of familiarity in a world that had moved on without asking me. That afternoon, sunlight poured through lace curtains, illuminating floating dust motes that seemed like memories refusing to settle. Margaret looked smaller somehow than I remembered. Her shoulders slumped. Her hands trembled as she folded laundry that didn't need folding. Her eyes told me everything. This wasn't about old family ties or polite courtesy. It was about survival. Her request to go somewhere private wasn't frivolous. It was urgent, and it made my chest tighten. Every instinct screamed caution, but another, quieter instinct whispered that walking away wasn't an option. I led her to my car, and we drove in silence to a quiet park by the river, the kind of place where people go to think, to cry, and to exist without being watched. We sat on a bench beneath towering oak trees draped with Spanish moss, the kind that sways like curtains in a breeze that smells faintly of salt and pine. There, away from walls, expectations, and prying eyes, she finally spoke. Her life had been unraveling. Her husband, Thomas Thompson, had passed away a year prior, leaving the house empty and silent. Rachel had moved away, rarely checking in. Bills piled up, her health declined, and loneliness pressed down like a weight she could no longer carry alone. I listened, not as an ex-boyfriend, not as a stranger, but as a human witnessing another human struggle. I didn't try to fix her problems, and I didn't step over boundaries. I simply sat, let her speak, let her grief exist. Every word she spoke tugged at something buried inside me, something I hadn't faced since Rachel left. My own confusion and guilt swirled together, with helping her create new wounds. Or could it actually heal both of us? In that moment, I realized something profound. Life doesn't always give us clean answers. Sometimes the right action is simply showing up, even when it's uncomfortable. The days that followed were unremarkable in the world's eyes, yet each moment felt monumental to us. We continued meeting in public places, always choosing locations that felt safe yet private enough for honest conversation. A small cafe by the harbor, its walls painted in peeling pastel shades, became our haven. Margaret ordered chamomile tea while I preferred black coffee. Neither of us spoke immediately. Sometimes the comfort of silence was more valuable than words. But slowly, her voice returned, soft but clear, as she spoke about her life after Thomas. She described the endless quiet, the way the rooms in her house seemed to sigh with absence. She told me about missed birthdays, appointments she had forgotten, bills stacked into precarious towers, and the creeping fatigue that weighed on her shoulders like a cloak she could never remove. Listening to her, I realized grief was not limited to those who had lost lovers or children. It lived in everyone who had loved deeply and suddenly lost the world they had relied on. I never offered solutions. I simply showed up. I drove her to appointments, helped organize paperwork that had lain untouched for months, and assisted in small household chores that had become overwhelming under the weight of her solitude. Each act was mundane on its face, but the repetition of kindness carried a silent message. She was not alone. Every drive through Charleston's quiet streets, every shared lunch or church service, became a thread reconnecting her to life, and somehow reconnecting me as well. Our conversations often drifted into memories, not just of grief, but of hope. Margaret spoke of her travels with Thomas before illness confined them, of laughter echoing in rooms that no longer heard it, and of small act of courage she had taken in her daily life. I shared fragments of my life after Rachel, of lessons learned too late, and of moments where forgiveness felt impossible. There was no rush to intimacy, no hidden agenda. We simply existed together in a space where vulnerability was not dangerous, only human. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the mossy branches of the park, Margaret paused mid-story, her eyes glistening. "You've given me something I didn't know I was missing," she said. Not advice, not pity, just presence. I nodded quietly, realizing that her words applied to me just as much. In helping her rebuild a sense of purpose, I had begun to mend the fractures grief had left in me. Weeks turned into months, and little victories began to accumulate. Margaret joined a local support group for widows, reconnecting with old friends she hadn't seen in years. She started volunteering at a food pantry, her energy returning slowly but steadily. Each time she laughed freely, without the weight of loneliness pressing down. It felt like spring after a long, harsh winter. I, too, found myself breathing easier. The bitterness I had carried toward Rachel softened. The wounds I had hidden from the world began to heal in quiet, almost imperceptible ways. Our bond was never romantic, though it carried the warmth of deep human connection. It was a delicate dance of boundaries and empathy. I was careful never to overstep, always asking myself whether my actions were about helping her or satisfying some unresolved need in myself. And Margaret, in turn, trusted me without pressure, sharing only what she chose and accepting my presence without expectation. During church services, we sat quietly together, letting the hymns wash over us. In one particular service, as the choir sang a hauntingly beautiful melody about renewal, Margaret squeezed my hand lightly. No words were exchanged, yet the gesture conveyed gratitude, trust, and a quiet reassurance that we were navigating the storm together. It struck me that sometimes human connection doesn't need explanation. It simply needs consistency and care. Even mundane moments carried significance. Folding laundry, carrying groceries, or driving to the doctor's office became rituals of shared life, each action reinforcing the quiet promise that no one needed to face hardship alone. There were evenings when the sun dipped low over the Charleston skyline, casting golden light over the streets, and we would sit in silence on her porch, sipping tea, listening to the distant calls of gulls, feeling an unspoken bond settle between us. I learned to redefine what it meant to help someone. It wasn't heroism or sacrifice. It was simply showing up. Margaret's resilience inspired me. She taught me patience, humility, and the subtle power of presence. In return, I learned that forgiveness isn't a single grand gesture. It is a series of quiet choices, made day after day, to let go of bitterness and show compassion where it is needed most. By the time summer approached, Margaret had found her footing. The tremble in her hands had eased, her steps carried a newfound steadiness, and her laughter returned more frequently. I realized then that our journey together wasn't about fixing what was broken, but about witnessing and supporting each other as we navigated life's unpredictability. And in doing so, I had rediscovered something I thought I had lost forever: hope. Summer deepened, and the golden warmth of Charleston afternoons seemed to carry with it a sense of closure. Margaret walked with a lighter step, her shoulders no longer burdened by the invisible weight of loss. The support group had become a source of strength, laughter spilling freely in ways I hadn't seen since the days before Thomas passed. Small victories, volunteering at the food pantry, reconnecting with old friends, even tending to her garden, signaled a life gently reclaiming itself. Watching her, I realized that healing was less about grand gestures and more about tiny, consistent acts of courage. One quiet evening, as we sat on the park bench beneath the sprawling oaks draped in Spanish moss, Margaret turned to me with a reflective smile. "Michael," she said, voice low but steady, "you didn't just help me find my footing again. You reminded me that kindness exists in the world, even when it's hard to see." I felt a lump in my throat, the words striking me with the weight of truth. It wasn't about gratitude alone. It was about human connection and showing up even when the situation is messy, awkward, or uncomfortable. For my part, I had changed as well. The bitterness I had held toward Rachel slowly dissipated, replaced by understanding and acceptance. The heartbreak of lost love was no longer a wound that dictated my daily actions. Instead, I had learned that compassion, patience, and presence could heal not just others but oneself. Sitting beside Margaret, listening to the distant calls of birds and the soft rustle of leaves, I realized that life's most profound lessons often arrive quietly, without fanfare. As weeks went by, our interaction settled into a rhythm that was both comforting and liberating. Margaret had re-established routines that gave her life structure and joy: morning walks along the harbor, volunteer shifts at the local shelter, and weekly calls to her grandchildren. Each accomplishment, no matter how small, radiated confidence and resilience. And while our connection remained strictly platonic, the depth of trust and mutual respect felt like a bond few people ever experience. I began to understand the subtle power of witnessing someone reclaim their life. There was no romance, no dramatic twists, just a quiet strength of two humans choosing decency, kindness, and presence over indifference or avoidance. We celebrated milestones quietly. The first time Margaret managed her bills without assistance, the day she hosted a small dinner for neighbors, the moment she laughed without hesitation, unguarded and free. These were victories neither of us could have orchestrated, yet each left an indelible mark on my heart. One afternoon, I realized something important. Life doesn't always allow for neat endings. Rachel and I would never reunite, and that chapter remained closed. Yet in helping Margaret, I had found closure for myself, a sense of peace and understanding that transcended the complexities of past relationships. The pain I once carried alone was now tempered by empathy, by the knowledge that even in difficult circumstances, one can choose to act with integrity and compassion. The final lesson arrived subtly, without warning. Margaret, standing stronger now, turned to me one morning and said, "Thank you for staying, for not running when things got uncomfortable." That's when I realized the real courage isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, and persistent. Her words lingered long after our conversation ended, a gentle reminder that life's truest impact comes not from spectacle, but from consistent, meaningful presence. Eventually, Margaret regained independence fully. Her home was filled with the warmth of friends, the laughter of community, and the quiet satisfaction of a life slowly rebuilt. I, too, stepped forward, carrying with me a renewed sense of purpose and understanding. The chapter with Rachel remained in the past, but it no longer defined me. The lessons learned from helping her mother, patience, empathy, resilience, and the power of showing up became guiding principles for the life I now embraced. As I walked past the river park where our journey first took a pivotal turn, I remember the afternoon when Margaret whispered, "Take me somewhere private." That moment, fraught with uncertainty and raw emotion, was the beginning of a journey neither of us could have anticipated. What mattered wasn't the discomfort or the fear, but the decision to stay present, to listen, and to act with integrity. If this story resonates, take a moment to reflect on what kindness means to you. Share it with someone who might need hope, and comment below one word that captures the essence of compassion in your life. These quiet acts ripple outward, shaping more than just one life. They create a legacy of empathy and courage. In the end, the story isn't about romantic heroics or dramatic gestures. It's about showing up, about the patience to remain present, and the courage to act with integrity when life demands it most. Margaret's life was rebuilt, my heart healed, and in the quiet spaces between our actions, we both learned that sometimes the simplest acts of kindness leave the deepest marks. And that is a lesson I will carry for the rest of my days.